Good day, everybody. Hopefully, everybody do good weekend today. It is now Monday. Monday,
It's
Monday the 3rd of April. We didn't have an April Fool's joke to give you today because it's the 3rd. That's reserved for the 1st. We're
Yep.
not savages here, even though we're called the Savage Patriots. We are not savages.
our,
Mere
our
civilized
country's
savages.
We know how to respect dates, okay?
our
Yeah,
country's a joke right now. But
yeah,
hey, look,
yes.
on
Hey,
another note, it
That's
is April 1st is the actual true New Year,
so
not
it's not
January.
we're in a perma first, is what we are. Uh,
It's the actual New Year because of spring. Everything's coming to life, spring. But
hey, we can hope.
that's another story we can talk about.
We have hail here today.
Mm.
Mhm.
Hail.
Jeez.
There is a super.
You sound super far away from your mic.
Yeah,
I sound super far away.
yeah.
Yeah, like super duper far. Like you ain't even in the mic.
Oh, okay, hang on.
It's
Let me
freaking.
fix that.
It's humid here, though. Very humid here today.
I prefer humidity.
Oh
It
no.
is humid. So is that better?
Yeah.
There you
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a supercell event that's about to happen here in kind of the central U.S. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Missouri, and a few northern states of us are all in that supercell event. Looks like it's going to be massive tornadoes for the next like couple of weeks.
So,
So-
do I need to recruit Goku?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Just have him do a Kamehameha like right into the sky and take.
Hey, we got a supercell. We might as well call Goku. Yay! Y'all Dragon Ball fans, you understand what I'm saying. If you don't, then too bad for you. We're cooler.
You should know. You should know at this point.
We're cooler than you. So today kicks off our 2-week excursion into the international wars of the United States, wars that we have fought outside of our bounds, and the logistics of them, and what they helped to push America to, whether for good or bad. We're going to be talking about what exactly the external wars that America have pushed did to us as citizens. Majority of the time, it's not stuff we wanted, but it's stuff that we got. So we're going to be talking a lot of that about that, and we're going to discuss today the Barbary Wars. Our panel, while not all of us are versed on the Barbary Wars, we have two that are, and that's the glorious part of having multiple people who are educated about different things. And the two that are most versed about that are Coy and Bro. And so we are going to leave it in their hands to give you a nice breakdown. Not that I'm immune to knowing, but they know more. And so you will always defer to the more educated on something instead of speaking out your behind. And I don't speak out my behind. So first off, we're going to have Coy jump off, give his informational piece about the Barbary Wars. And I'm sure him and Bro, they worked together before. They can figure out how to divulge information. And as I have questions, I will ask. And if you guys in the audience have questions too, we'll just drop them and we'll drop it to Mr. Education down at the bottom there, Mr. Mac. Proceed, sir.
Okay.
Cue the colonial music.
Right. We need the music to go on it, man. The Barbary Wars is a fascinating bit of history, for one, because of the fact that people have utterly forgotten that this war even exists to begin with, right? This is one of the first wars the United States has ever fought after its founding internationally, right? At this point in time, they have just been fighting with the British and Indians at this point in time. So like we're not covering the Indian Wars because that's going to be a whole thing in itself that we can talk about as a topic. So that leaving those things aside, the first international war that comes into play right before the War of 1812 is the Barbary War. The first one. There's actually two wars, by the way. The first one lasting about 4 years, and the second one only lasted 3 days. Mind you, because we just bombarded the coast and said F you, and then we're finishing this. That's basically how the second war ended, right? In 3 days. But the first one is very topical in the line because it changed a lot of the ways of how the U.S. foreign policy and how the kind of imperialistic nature of how it started with we need to have controls of trade routes and the seas in order to protect American interests. And this is where the start of the actual U.S. Navy comes into play, right? So I don't know. Have you guys ever heard of the Barbary Wars before I brought it up like a couple of weeks ago?
In name.
Yes.
I understand the Barbary Wars from the preface of the fact that
there was something called the Barbary slave trade, to which
which
slavery
is
is
mentioned
which is a
right,
big part.
right. And so, from my understanding, it was our attempt to try and quell the whole slavery movement into America, not utilize and to bring an end to slavery, basically, which is kind of odd that we're in a position that we're in today. Is like America is this horrible, wretched state of a nation that had slavery, but it's just like, well, I mean, we had,
Multiple.
Moroccans and Muslims
Right.
and Greeks and Romans and all that
So
stuff.
one
having
of the
slaves.
things that you can't get in, we have to give a bit of a background of what the Barbary War was about in the first place. So most people know that we fought the war against pirates because it was U.S. versus pirates, which is actually more of the pirate states, right? We're talking 4 independent states that were attached to the Ottoman Empire that were controlling access to the Mediterranean through, terroristic measures, right? And they were extracting tribute payments from European states and also the United States. They were covered up until the point that they gained independence. And then they said, hey, guess what? Those guys are free game now. We can take U.S. sailors and cargo and ransom them and enslave them. And nobody's going to stop us from doing it because they're not paying tribute. And they started paying tribute and then said, okay, fine. But then things changed and they kept doing it again. So they were extracting wealth through the trades of the Europeans and then also Americans. And that's where it really kind of starts to come to a head, is the fact that when Thomas Jefferson came in to be president, he said, F that, we're not paying tribute to pirates. And that's where the real basis of this comes from, is that they were trying to extort money from the United States in order to get their ships and their savers safe passage, and also get them back from the Barbary states, right? So the other part of this that people tend to miss is when this is usually coming from people from the anti kind of woke side of things, when they're talking about slavery and how the kind of 1619 project make things about only Africans being slaves. At this point in time, that is not true. It never has been true. It was based off of religious practices. African slavery, and the way that we know it as chattel slavery, didn't come along until much later in time, right? So this is when the transition is happening. Up until this point, the Arab states and the Barbary corsairs were raiding and taking Europeans, white Europeans, to North Africa and into the Ottoman Empire to be sold and bought, just as well as African slaves were being taken, right? This is all because they were not Muslims, right? Christians, you cannot enslave Muslim individuals because it goes against the Quran. You cannot do that, right? Same thing in Christianity. You cannot enslave other Christians, which they did. They don't consider Protestants Christians, by the way, and like Catholics don't consider Protestants Christians at this point in time. So that's why the Irish were free game as well, because the Protestants in England did not see the Catholics as being Christian, right? So there's a whole episode to this that people kind of miss, and the nuance of history is the fact that these sorts of slave trades were big business for everybody involved, right? So all of these North African trades, all the Ottoman Empire made money off often taking European slaves and selling them further east, right? So African slaves went west, European slaves went east, right? So that's the thing that they don't want to talk about in terms of this trade. So one of the main things of why the Barbary War happened was to stop the extraction of tribute and to stop the European slave trade. And that's what kind of kicks off this whole thing. So I've been long-winded about this explanation and background. So you have any questions, I can answer them now.
Okay. So with the encouragement for us to let me start with this. What benefit outside of stopping a slave trade was it for America to intervene?
So the main intervention in this was to set up basically the notion that we need to have safe passage and trade for the United States, or else we aren't going to be able to continue on. So the argument between against Thomas Jefferson at this point is that we need basically where manifest destiny comes from, right? We need to continue westward. We don't need to be worried about the East, right? The trades in Europe is their problem. It's not our problem. We need to be heading west. That was their argument, is that we need to be focusing our manpower and reserves and treasury to the west. We do not need to go back to the East where we came from and protect those interests there. They're not our problem, right? So this is where the kind of isolationist route takes place between people against Jefferson and those who are more national focused, right? The nationalists. We're talking about focusing American ideal. Like, we need to focus on America, right? We don't need to be worrying about national interests of people overseas. Michael, you look like you have something you want to add on to it.
Oh, no. I was just giving a thumbs up about,
Oh, okay.
that word you use. But, when it comes to the slave trade, like Coy said, was going on the East and the West Coast. And at first, the American Navy started on the West Coast, but then, once the West Coast, and I know he's going to get into it, started to catch wind of, it was a coalition of Navy, of people stopping them. That's where you saw the big push from the East Coast.
Right. And that's basically what it was. It was those more focused on manifest destiny and the others that were focused on keeping America in kind of the international favor. Like I said earlier before we started the show, is that right around this time, you gotta imagine how crazy Europe is at this time. Like, we're talking, this is the Napoleonic Wars that is happening, and this is right before the War of 1812. So all these things are kind of coming up to a head. Europe cannot control the Mediterranean. And so now it's being left up to the Ottomans, and it's being left up to the Barbary pirates, right? And so they're saying, if you want to use our waters, basically, you have to pay us. And so one of the things that happened is on Jefferson's inauguration on 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli demanded $225,000, which was equivalent to $3.6 million in 2021. Right, is the same equivalent money. They were asking for $3 million of money to get their tribute. They wanted to extract that money from the United States. And up until this point, it was well known and acknowledged that all you had to do was just pay them, then they go away, right? So that whole idea, I think this is where it stems for U.S. foreign policy, is that we do not negotiate with terrorists ever. Because if we do this, they will keep coming back and asking for money. And we've seen this over the years of how America has dealt with terrorist actions or kidnappings, right? What did we used to do when somebody kidnapped somebody in the United States, right? And took them somewhere? What happened to them?
We killed them.
No. That's exactly what happened. They got a SEAL team sent to their door, and they kicked it in. That's what used to happen. Now we just give them, in Brittany Griner's case, when Russia comes along and says, hey, do this or else, they say, okay, fine, we'll trade the WNBA star for the weapons dealer. That
was a good movie, by the way. That was an excellent movie.
In order for her to come back home safely. And guess what's happened now is that we have a Wall Street Journal reporter who was just arrested in Russia on spying charges, who they're now going to use again as a bargaining piece, to get what they want. And so that's why I think it's the Barbary Wars is really important historically, is because of the fact that it took this notion that the United States does not and will not negotiate with people who want to extract and extort money from us, right? Which I think is a good policy, mind you, is that the United States should maintain that policy of not giving in to people who wish to do us harm, right?
Right.
So I get that. But that is not what we're doing, and it's not what's happening under Joe Biden, and kind of bringing this up to more modern states of America, right? So continuing on from that, the war itself started into what we now know the U.S. Navy to be, and to control its controlling interest of the seas, right? So that kind of imperialistic nature of, we want to maintain
order.
Yeah, we want to maintain order of the seas. We want to maintain order of free travel and trade throughout all of the seas, not just around us, but all of the seas in the world. So this is one of the main key things that changed the way and shaped America moving forward. right? So that's why it's such a big deal that this war happened in the first place, right?
So Coy,
the other, yeah.
So was this the beginning understanding of America becoming the superpower that is
this is the bud, right? This is the route that takes place in America that starts it on its path to being an imperialistic power.
World police. Yes.
The world police. This is the first world police action
and
that the United States involves itself in.
And there's another thing people got to think about as he's telling you about this war is, remember, slavery was ended in 1865, correct?
Yep.
1865. Yep. This is 1801. 1801. Now, you got to understand that at that time, America was already trying to stop the slave trade from Africa. They were already trying to stop it. So a lot of this goes into that, like, because there were still ships going on, and America pretty much cut the crap off. They were like, hey, no more ships. And then, fast forward 60-something years later, boom, slavery ended. So this is like, it was already building up. It's just a part of history they don't talk about. It was happening. It was just slow moving.
Yeah.
So my question then, now, with Jefferson pushing the original onset of the war, and yielding then the U.S. Navy, Madison was next, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong. Madison was afterwards, right?
I believe so.
Yes. So with the advent of the Navy, because our goal was to try and secure commerce for ourselves and safe passage, so we created a Navy in order for that to happen. Why then, or how then, did we go from just protecting our own interests to intervening in others with said Navy? What egged that motion on?
It's an interesting question, because one of the things that happened from this was that up until this point, the U.S. Navy was basically just a skeleton crew of ships, right? Mm-hmm. There was not a Department of the Navy. It didn't exist. There were Marines for the Navy,
right?
But the Department of the Navy didn't exist, really, in a turn. So this push is what made them realize they needed to have a fleet of ships, right? Mm-hmm. So they didn't have enough ships in order to even do this war to begin with. And that's one of the pushbacks that Thomas Jefferson faced, was the fact that they said it was going to be too costly. This war was going to be too costly. We had to build the ships, and then we had to send them. And there was no guarantee we were going to get anything out of this, right? Other than safe passage and then our sailors back. That was about it. And no tribute payments, right? So it would have been cheaper in their eyes. It would have been cheaper just to pay the tribute payment versus going to war with the pirates. It's like there was no point, right? We could just pay them, we do our thing, everybody does their stuff, and we go on about our business, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to focus on westward expansion. They didn't want to be facing a war in the East when they didn't need to. So that's kind of where we get to from there.
So the Barbary War, jumping in, was for tribute, slave ending, and safe passage of our ships for trade.
Yes.
Was there any treaty made with the countries that we were either intervening on behalf of for our trade reasons, or that we were putting down on behalf of our safety of passage, that was either, how should I phrase this, done in bad faith, or we recanted on?
Not that I know of. What it actually was the Treaty Alliance of 1778 and 83, which was was guaranteed by France to protect shipping,
right?
West. Right. But guess what was happening in France at this time?
Revolution.
It was the revolution in Napoleon.
Right.
Can't exactly protect the United States interest if we're facing Napoleon at this time.
Right.
So there were treaties for them. Up until this point, there was a tributary payment made to the Barbary states at this point in time, until Jefferson came in and said, no, we shouldn't be doing this anymore. So it was really Thomas Jefferson that came in and just said, we shouldn't be paying these people ever at all, because all we're doing is encouraging them to keep kidnapping U.S. sailors or merchant ships, right? It's encouraging them to do bad things. So that was his line of thinking, is we have to stop them in order for our continued interest in trade in the interest of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with this, when it comes to the Swedish, they were kind of just along for the ride, so to speak, because their interests aligned mutually with the United States at the time.
They're always along for the ride.
Yeah,
we forget they exist.
So that's what it pretty much comes down to, is that we basically went ahead and did it on our own while everybody else was busy with their own shit in Europe, right? So they're fighting each other in the Napoleonic Wars at the time. So we were kind of left to our own devices.
We did have a couple other countries that were helping us within, the Mediterranean region. I think Greece was one, America. I mean, there were some countries that were helping, but they weren't putting in an amount of manpower that the Americans were.
Okay, so we've established the reasons for the war. We've established the outcome of the war. We established who was behind the war. We've established who was being fought against. Now, by this time, the seas have been mostly dominated by France and the Spaniards. A little bit of the British was still left, but the majority of people that were really dominating water warfare was the French and the Spaniards. They know how to, I'll tell you, they know how to do it. Was there any, this might be for the next topic of the next couple of wars, but were there any treaties that we had to make with either Spain or the French later, just after the Barbary Wars ended, to secure either the same reasons, passage, trade, or freedoms? Because I don't remember any treaties being made with them.
No, I don't think there was at that time. I don't think it was until much later, until after the War of 1812, when there was more things. Because like the Barbary states didn't really end until the French basically made it a colony, right?
Which is
So
that's why I'm asking the question as to whether or not we made any kind of treaty with them, seeing that how the future of what was to come would kind of get engulfed in the one person, the next two people that were more successful on the open seas.
Yeah, no, I don't believe so.
Okay,
I'll have to read into more on that.
Yeah,
I think that's after what happened in the Second Barbary War. So let me
So we have at our tips here the first inclination or the first look into the military industrial complex.
Yeah,
of us doing certain things for self, but at the same time putting our stamp on others to not, do their thing. Because I personally don't see our need to have intervened in the Barbary Wars side of it, other than just standing our. Because if we were successful in creating a navy, we should have been successful in just defeating the pirates and the open seas to keep them at bay. Understand the diplomacy side of it, where you want to be able to successfully secure a future passage back and forth. But at that time, I don't see the need, and didn't see the need, for us to be that heavy-handed. The outcome obviously was of a great boost to the United States, because look at where we ended up with in terms of our military. Of course, it's no longer the case with where we are. We are probably at like half the strength that we were 10 years ago. We are no longer a real threat to the world when it comes to our military. So in this particular war, it seemed like our yield was fairly short-lived. Our real success was only short-lived. How long after that first one you said was the Second Barbary War?
3 days.
3 days later.
After the War of 1812, right? So like the reason they kind of got put on hold is because of the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812. That's kind of where things got kind of left off. It was like a continuation, like in terms of a movie, it's like the last 10 minutes of the movie, right? So we watched all the like first half of the movie, said, hey, we got to pause for a second, and then they came back and watched the rest of it. It's a basic way to explain it. The kind of the key point and takeaway of what this war actually means for kind of precedent in the United States. It's also the first time that the president in history up until this point, basically started a conflict with another nation or states without authorization from Congress. There was not a traditional call to war. Congress did not enact the war. The president took it upon himself to start a conflict, right? This is the first time the president really took it upon himself and the military powers to declare an enemy, basically, and then go after them in a limited campaign, right? So we hear that in Putin's rhetoric too, is like he's doing it for a limited campaign or a special military operation. It's the same sort of idea, right? So in the First Barbary War, Congress passed an act they passed an act, right, or a kind of a piece of legislation that said that the president had an act for the protection of commerce of the seamen of the United States against Tripolitan cruisers, employ such of the armed vessels of the United States as to be judged requisite for protecting effectively the commerce and seamen thereof on the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean and adjoining seas, right? So they didn't necessarily call war. They just said, hey, you can protect us from pirates. That's your prerogative, right? So it's the same thing we did with the kind of the Patriot Act, right? And terrorists. It's like, for the protection of the United States, you can, in a limited way, go after certain people, right? So what they did with the kill list in Obama's time, this is kind of where that stemmed from. This is the history of where this kind of action from the president comes from. And then the Second Barbary War, yet again, not calling for war in itself, they did pass another piece of legislation that authorized the president to use the U.S. Navy, quote, as judge requisite. God, I can't even say that word. Yeah, requisite by the president to protect the commerce and seamen of the United States and the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, and adjoining seas, right? And it had the ability to seize all vessels, goods belonging to the Algiers, and basically commission privateers for the same purpose, right? So we sent pirates after pirates.
We became pirates.
Yeah, we became pirates in the second round.
Jefferson was the president, by the way, people, in case you're wondering who the president was. It was Jefferson. So now people might think this is an anti-American platform, because here's the thing: we're just bringing out the truth of what the government started and did.
Right.
So this is of no reflection of the men and women in the military. This is a reflection of the people who are at the helm governmentally that decided certain things that were, in essence, contrary to the public good. And if the future wars didn't tell us that, I don't know what else would. This is just the beginning. Like I said, the purpose behind what we're giving you, the information we're giving you, is to give you a more robust look at the government as a whole and show you what exactly their motives originally might have been to what they ended up being. And so you can understand now when they tell you today that this particular place on earth is causing problems, there's more than likely there's something that they want from that region, have in that region, or need in that region. Hence why we have to go into that region. There's no more diplomacy. We're just going to send war over there because it's easier. If I'm a superpower and I have the place beat by, say, 10,000 forces, I'm not going to bother communicating with you about what I want. I'm just going to come take it. War in Afghanistan, another one. We'll be talking about those, by the way. Iraq, another big one. The small little thing we had in Guyana, another one. There were tons of them that came up to where we were in the middle of things that we ought not to have been in the middle of. This particular war on the face seems really, really needed. Oh, we need transit, and we need protections, and we need to make sure we're traveling safe. And in the meantime, what we're all going to do is we're going to stop a certain kind of trade of people and all that stuff. But in the end, all we did was replace who was becoming the pirate on the seas, and it ended up being everyone else but the pirates.
Hey, Corey, I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, or I guess everyone can answer this, but here's the thing. So, in reading, the motivation behind our entry into the Barbary War was to, in order to pay tribute, the Barbary corsairs were capturing American travelers, I guess. Correct?
Yeah, merchant ships and sailors. Yes.
Would that kind of sort of be where propaganda started as well, in terms of communicating support for our entry into the Barbary War?
I mean, it was more of a support. It was more of a intervention in the upper echelons. I mean, I'm honestly the normal everyday American probably could care less what was happening with the Barbary War. Even today, standards, and then it would have been the same. It's like, what, they're going to fight some pirates? Okay, sounds like a good idea to me. It's the same thing with terrorists. So they're going to fight some terrorists? Okay, that's a good idea to me. You know, most people aren't going to care, as they don't care how the bacon's made as long as they get bacon. You know what I mean? So for this war, it shaped the way that the U.S. was going forward and how it acts today. But for the most part, it's widely unknown by people as a whole in general. They don't care what happened in the like the Barbary Wars, right? They don't care that it was ending the white slaves trade or the European slave trade that the Ottomans were running and the North Africans and the Arabs were running. They don't care about that. They don't care about the historical value of that. They only care that now that the president can call onto the Navy and the military to do limited campaigns without congressional authority for war. Right. So this is where it goes. It starts going diverging from what the intention of the war powers were and the separation between the two of the president of the United States and Congress. Congress is the one that's supposed to be able to decide when we go to war, not the president of the United States. Right. So Jefferson took it upon himself in order to stop the piracy, which is fine. It's good and all. But it's just that slippery slope that started from there. So I think this really is the true point of where we start to see the rise of the roots of what the military industrial complex will end up being, right? Because war is a very profitable business, right? And that's just where we're going to get led into eventually, is that these interventions overseas, there's going to be the people that are saying we can't intervene. And then those are saying that we have to and we must. So the neocons, and what we understand them today, are the people that are saying we have to do limited engagement wars in order to keep them off our soil, right? So it's kind of the same process. We need to take care of the Corsairs there so they don't come here. That kind of ideology. And so that's where the whole neocon establishment idea of warfare comes from, is this war. That's why it is absolutely important to understand why this war was fought and what it actually did for the United States and where it kind of started shifting everything in place. And it'll make sense as we go on the next couple of episodes and how these wars were actually shifting more power to the president than they probably should have, right? And Congress should have maintained and revoked from. So
when they put in the International Wars Act, where you have to pass everything through Congress, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't just kick one off. Was that a linchpin, or did it happen years after?
I think it was years after.
Because it just crossing my mind. I had not looked into it, and I don't remember. I mean, I probably know it, but I don't remember it. I have no doubt that this may have played a part, simply because there were probably people in government that did not necessarily get behind the fight that Jefferson put forward.
No.
Even though the succeeding president bolstered the Navy by sending out another envoy. And if I'm not mistaken, he sent out a second one. Decatur sent out, he was in 2 battles, right? Stephen Decatur. And I think Madison sent him out the second time. So it's not like he came in, the next president came in to slow things back. I think he escalated it to another level. So
exactly. And the Corsair piracy didn't end until after the French came in and took over North Africa as a colony, right? So colonialism ended piracy in the Mediterranean, oddly enough.
1973. So it was like almost 100 years later.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's a gradual progression. Like all these things that happen in the United States when it comes to war powers is a gradual progression of things. So we don't give up our rights easily right off the bat, right? We slowly give them away. And that's kind of where this comes from, is the idea that we keep giving power to a centralized authority, even though the United States Constitution was made and ratified for the reason of keeping centralized power out of the federal government in the first place, right?
And one thing you have to think about also is our country was fairly new at that time also.
Yeah.
So you still had, it was still a little rough around the edges. I mean, by the time that war started, we was officially a country, let's say about 3.5 years, maybe, we're we're still babies at this country thing. So the balance of powers, you have to they probably didn't even understand it themselves. Really, they were just like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna mirror this country, but this is the way we're gonna do it. So they probably didn't really understand how the balance of powers work. This is why Jefferson just probably did what he did, because no one really understood how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, because it was still the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, right?
So that's one thing to think about.
Okay,
but it's really funny that people tend to forget that Thomas Jefferson wasn't all that old when the country became
he was a kid,
a country, right? He was in his 20s.
Yeah, he was young
when this happened. Like so everybody thinks that the founding fathers were like old dudes. They weren't. They were young bucks. Like these were young dudes that were in their own.
They were young revolutionists, man.
Yeah. Young revolutionaries. It's just funny how that like people tend to see that because they see pictures of him, and
well, that's how they portray him, probably because they wore them wigs and made them look older because with age comes respect. So in order to make these young men look older, they put these white wigs on them, made them look like older men to gain that respect. Yeah, to gain that respect. So, but yeah, a lot of people don't know how young they really were.
It's crazy.
I think I found the one I want to go into next, and you guys can tell me if this is one that you want to talk about.
I haven't heard that one in a while,
and that's the Opium War.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good one too.
Okay, yeah. So I want to jump into that, and I'll try and make sure I get a nice view on this one. But I would love to delve into the Opium War, and hopefully we can get some information from two people about that. Like I said, many of the things that we're going to be bringing to you the next couple of weeks is stuff to help you understand how and where the American government got most of its power internationally, and what that massive impact overseas had on us. We're looking at 1820, I think, is when the Opium War kicked off, the first one. And so we're going to take a good look at the Opium Wars on Wednesday and get both of them in one. We're not going to split it up because we're tackling one group of wars the same way. The only war we're splitting up was 1 and 2. Okay, we're splitting up World War 1 and 2. They were tackling those, but separately because they were completely different reasonings. The Opium Wars had, just like we put Barbary War 1 and 2 in this one, we're talking about the Opium Wars, the two that took place, and then we're going to talk about World War 1 and 2 separately. Not this week because there are others in between. So hopefully what we covered today would help you at least get an inclination to see how exactly government versus the people decide things overseas that eventually affect the people, and the people still have no say over it. And it's probably more egregious now than it has ever been, because now you have people that go to war, even though Congress approves it, but Congress is getting paid by people outside to go to war for something for them and not for us. So it was a like Coy said, it was a slippery slope, and we stepped right on it with some shoes that that were just horrible shoes. They were like moccasins. Just we're gone. Okay, we were gone. They were not grippable shoes. Any last words, Coy, about the war before we dip?
For me, in this point, is the Barbary War is one of the things that have led us to where we are today. Like I said, it's like there's certain foreign policies the United States has that are excellent that we need to continue. That is not negotiating with terrorists and not letting people push us around. Obviously, as a nation, especially a burgeoning one that the United States was, they needed to push back. They had to defend themselves. Like there's no reason they shouldn't have. They needed free trade. They needed things. We were still kind of dependent on Europe at the time because we just broke away. We're young children. We still had that lingering attachment to the East, right? But there were those that were mentioned, like I mentioned, they were focusing on heading out west. They don't want to deal with the East anymore. We want to do our own thing. That is our destiny out there. So this is the beginning of Manifest Destiny and the argument of staying out of Europe and going into an isolationist stance, right? So this is where the beginning of isolationism comes from, and also Manifest Destiny comes from, right? So this is the beginning. These are the roots of what make America what it is today. And it's also the beginning of the U.S. Navy, one of the most famous wars the Marines ever fought. It's in the Marine Corps hymn. I know because I had to say
Tripoli.
so,
Tripoli.
So
the
like
halls of Montezuma.
But the thing is, a lot of people don't know that Tripoli, that's what they're talking about. That's exactly what they're talking about, the Barbary Wars.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is, like I said, we go point by point of the wars, but I don't think that's what's important about the wars. That's what the outcome of these wars caused us to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
So lost the control over the president on declaring unilaterally independent wars, right? That Congress has to come in and kind of sweep up and justify, right? So that's what we see today with drone strikes and everything else, and these limited engagement wars. Is as long as we don't go to war or put boots on the ground, we don't need congressional approval to do limited actions, which isn't true. Constitutionally, it's not true. It's never been true. They just keep not enforcing it like they should. Congress should be enforcing the Constitution on the president from limiting his ability to engage in warfare without a congressional act saying that we are at war. We haven't had an actual congressional act of war since World War II, right? And even before then, we had those limited engagements, limited actions, call for war. And that's the thing we have to change if we want to change the way that the United States is running, and especially people that are like anti-imperialism all day long, and stop letting the president do things on his own without an act of Congress.
Well, understand what they did, though. Okay, real quick before we close, what they did and do now is they create, just like, and I think this is partially what they've learned from, trust me, they study history. They learn that if you can create a massive emergency type situation, whether it's true or not, you create a pirate-like situation, it would give you reasonings to go and deal with it, because if we don't, this could be really bad. So we got to go in. We can't wait for approval. We have to act now.
Emergency.
And so they will place this thing on you just like they did. Obama did it. Clinton did it. The Bushes did it. All of them did it, because minus the last guy, because he didn't participate in that.
That's right.
They all do it in order to bypass that 1973 Wars Act. And they do it very successfully, because if I can create an emergency. Now, mind you, this is why they talk to the foreign agencies so well. They talk to the foreign agencies to create a cataclysm of events to where this is the next one we're going after? Perfect. Oh my gosh, terrorists, we got to run in and get this saved. Oh, look what they did to our building. We'll even create a false flag to go after people that we don't like. So we become pirates to go after pirates to remain pirates. It's kind of crazy. It feels like VeggieTales. We're the pirates that don't do anything.
And another thing people have to think about is, as Coy mentioned, let Congress do their job.
Yeah.
There's way too much money in war for Congress to even do anything. There's way too much. The lobbyists and the industrial, military complex, they have a lot of money involved in these wars, believe it or not, but they're behind the curtain. They're the guys behind it all. So if the president said he wants to go to war, 99% of the time, unless they're playing political theater, Congress is going to agree. Because they're all getting paid. It's some money, man. Everyone's getting paid. Pay me.
Everything anywhere is always about money. Like the reason
it's all
they
about
did
money.
this to continue the tributary payments was because of money, right? And it's like, I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to pay guys for nothing.
And it's never going to matter what the American people think or how we feel about a war. A majority of American people can be against it, and a lot of people are anti-war or against any type of war. But when that money's talking to these big wigs, they're going to get on the news and tell you that the majority of Americans approve this. Just think about it. It's a lot of dollars involved. So as we're going through all these wars and everything, those dollar signs, think about those dollar signs and the money that's going into them.
Yeah.
And who's getting paid.
And we'll make sure we break that, because it becomes a little more obvious later on in history. Because we have a lot more openness when it comes to journalism and stuff like that. And there are two sides working. There's the people working to try and get information about why the government does what it does. And then there's the government trying to hide that information so the people don't know. So you're blindsided. So we'll be getting into a lot more of the details, because you can read a lot of the details of the reasonings in the laws that they pass thereafter. Yep. Whatever the war yields, you can probably tell from the after. Of course, it's late, a little too late, but you can tell from the results of the war really why they went to war and not what they told you they went to war for. So Wednesday, we'll be dealing with the Opium Wars. and we'll decide by Wednesday what Fridays will be. But we want to make sure we take this in a very good sequence so that we can really break apart, because the Opium Wars, whether you believe it or not, has a lot to do with people like Joe Biden.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and you'll see why. You'll see why. And I don't mean because he's high all the time. It's something completely different, but more like his son. It'll give you good reasons to why his son's the way he is. So thank you guys for tuning in. Don't miss Wednesday, because like I said, the closer we get to current war times today, I think it'll start fleshing out more so you can understand what exactly your government has been doing, is doing, and why they don't want certain people to succeed, not race-wise, in the presidency, because if they get cut off from what they've been doing, their power is over. And it'll explain a lot about why the indictment dropped too as well. Once everything's understood, they can't stop you. Once you get that information out into your head, you have the power at that point.
Power, my friends.
Yep. So we'll catch you guys on Wednesday, same bat time, same bat channel, 6:30 Eastern, Opium Wars 1 and 2, and we'll give you all the breakdown on that. Until that time, people, y'all keep safe, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Like, comment, subscribe.